High performers don't burn out like everyone expects. They don't explode, they don't quit, they don't disappear. They just slowly lose momentum. And the scary part, from the outside, everything still looks fine. Good day to you all, and welcome to Bad Day Excellence. Here's another fun episode where I'm going to mix things up. Today, I'm feeling a lot better and a lot more like myself, about 85% never better. With that said, I'm going to share again this fun little presentation I put together that I really think a lot of us are going to feel, and I'm going to help you figure this out. What am I talking about today? I'm talking about why high capacity professionals quietly lose momentum. This is really, really important because I went through this experience a time or two. I was crying in a closet during COVID, which I think a lot of us were doing in the end. Really, what I want to talk about is the fact that why? Why? Like we've built this identity of always contributing, and then we look good on the outside, but on the inside, there's just something off. And, you know, what I mentioned earlier is, we don't crash. We sort of fade away. And it's really interesting the where I felt this myself and so on the inverse, I've seen this in a couple of my team members, especially, you know, one went through a very traumatic loss and tried to come back after a while, and we tried to ease her in, but she always kept grasping at, like, "This is who I was before this happened," and she just couldn't get there, and so, we saw her kind of, much like Homer here, fade away into the bushes. So, first of all, here's the biggest thing that I want everybody to remember, there's this, back in the day where you would Google everything and, like, I've got not feeling well, you Google it, and then all of a sudden WebMD says you've got elbow cancer. No. In this case, most of the capable people out there, when we're talking about like something feels off, we often say, "Oh, well, I'm just not motivated. So let me go watch some motivational vehicles videos," or "I need better habits." And, because, you know, it's always like a systems thing because I built up these systems in order to maintain this reliability that everybody knows me for. And so then we begin to push harder. I suffered from imposter syndrome, and all I could do was just read more, practice more, do more. Whereas, like, the root of it wasn't exactly about the doing more, it was about doing less, but better. So, once you've misdiagnosed ourselves, a lot of times we'll get caught in this cycle. Again, it's about the system, right? Like that's the easiest thing because when we think about it, identity work is hard. So, but systems, that's really, really easy. So we'll create a plan, we'll execute the plan. Probably about like 7 to 10 days later, life gets loud, right? Because look at whenever you want to lose weight or the New Year's resolution, everything is wonderful. And then the second Friday of January is called Quitter's Day because life gets loud. It gets messy. And then finally the plan collapses. And as soon as that plan collapses, you're just like, well, that plan didn't work. Let me start again. And it just keeps going over and over and over again. Why? Because systems are easy. We can buy a new notebook. We can adapt a new habit. Let's wake up at 4 in the morning every single day because that's what productive, successful people do. No, no, that is we need to break this cycle. So how do we do that? So what's really actually going on? Well, believe it or not, you're in drift. You got to turn left to go right, right? Or you got to turn right to go left. I forget what it is in Lightning McQueen, but the biggest thing is you're stuck in drift. Well, what is drift? Like you're basically moving from intentional and you're drifting into reactive. You handle everything, but you're leading nothing. It doesn't look like chaos. You look busy, but you're not getting anywhere. And, really what ends up happening is you're stuck in this. If you were to look at the Eisenhower matrix, which is a four box matrix where you have important, not important, urgent, and not urgent. And you're stuck in this everything's important and everything's urgent, and you're constantly putting out fires. But what's really the magic quadrant is when something is important and not when something is not important but urgent. And that's when, you know, all the magic happened. That's kind of like the upstream work. And so when you're in this reactive mode, you can't get out of it because you're stuck always putting out these fires. And again, on the outside, you look super responsible, you look productive, it looks good on paper, but inside you're still not doing the work that needs to be done. So, I think what I want you to do is like, let's go deeper, right? What is that? Well, to me, a lot of times this is an identity problem. Okay. You've always been known for being reliable. When momentum drops, these highly capable people will compensate with carrying more, absorbing more, pushing more. Everything is more because if I'm not reliable, if I'm not delivering, right? If I slow down, I'm not who everybody thinks I am. And all of your energy begins to just keep leaking out. It's a hole in a barrel. You keep filling in the barrel, but the water just keeps leaking out at the bottom. And, you just can't keep refilling it. And so that overachiever, the fixer, the dependable, all of this identity now becomes draining. It's just like you can't keep up with it. And that's where a lot of the individuals that I work with, where they say like, I feel stuck or, I just don't know how I got here. I have an individual today that messaged me this morning that I've been working with him for the past 2 or 3 weeks. And he's like, I did something amazing. Um, he lives in an area and he has these external pressures where it's cultural, it's societal, it's family, that you need to be successful and you can never slow down. Well, today he's like, I went back and drew and he lit up. He showed me something that he did in 2016 and he showed me what he did today. And I was like, that's amazing, right? He took the space because he's been doing the work, the identity work, saying it's not just about delivering this, it's also about the fulfillment. So, but what he was doing was like he kept updating, he kept pushing harder and harder and harder and found that like there just was no fulfillment there. So instead of updating the identity, people will just double down on performance. That bullet point is really, really important for people to understand that the identity work is hard. Our brains are wired for safety. And, in Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about two systems of thinking. The fast thinking, which is the erroneous, but it's really quick and easy, doesn't require a lot of energy. It's riddled with a lot of bias and past experiences. And, you know, those are the ones where, like, what happened yesterday? Okay, well, I saw this happen. So I'll just react that way. And then you have the system two thinking, which is very thorough and requires a lot of energy. But guess what? That thinking is lazy. I actually like to call it dash and deep. Dash is super fast. If they were on a baseball team, Dash would be all over the field, right? Fielding the ball and everything. But deep thinks slowly. It thinks methodically. It thinks strategically, and they're the ones that will win championships, right? Deep will win championships. Dash will win the game, and or win the inning, really. But that overachiever identity, that's not going to do it. So, because the identity thinking takes a lot longer, people just look for the systems. That's why they focus on the systems. And that in the end is that recipe for disaster because, you're only playing a short-term game. So I want you to understand, really, nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. And, it's just that momentum is structural, right? Like it only survives when the next move is decided, which is why you focus on identity. And, because like, what would this person do in this situation? Bad days have rules, right? Bad day excellence. That's what this podcast is all about. Or my whole company, my mentality, bad days. What are you going to do on bad days? It's four parts planning and one part action, right? And then, you know, momentum, because it's structural, it will survive when failure doesn't collapse your identity. I told you, I was suffering from imposter syndrome. That imposter syndrome collapsed every aspect of my identity. We're coming up on 10 years ago that this happened. I was covered in sticky liquid because I was just let go from my job. I lost my dream home because we won the bid for that home that morning, so we had to pull out. I had a 5-month-old baby at home. I could not lose, and yet I did. Life said, "Hold my beer." And, it was really, really hard, and I failed miserably and did not know what to do next. So, what do we do, right? Well, it starts with awareness, and that's, I really want you to understand that, like, it's not about doing more. It's about doing less but better. And, first step is always about awareness. And things that you need to remember is like you can't install systems on top of drift because those systems, like, strong ground from Brene Brown, right? Like you can't build a house on shifting sands. It'll collapse. So, you need to really identify who you are. And that first step is just understanding where are your leaks, right? And, in addition to that, this second bullet point about pause isn't weakness. It isn't. It absolutely isn't. And, like that's what's really important is like you need to create space between life's chaos and your next right step. Because when you're stuck in that reaction mode, there's no space between it. Your brain says safety, so I go back to my default systems. And that ends up becoming burnout, shame spiraling, and really just you start lashing out at others, which is terrible. And that's why the I created the Momentum Reset community on School. It's a 5-day reset. I'm going through it right now, believe it or not. I still use this system. Last week, I caught a terrible, terrible, terrible cold. I was at like 102 fever, hacking a lung. You could still hear it in my nose, and I'm still recovering. I hadn't woken up to my normal routine, which is wake up at 4:15, go down to the gym, move something, my body, my breath, my mind, whatever. Just lift weights, just move something, right? And so yesterday started my reset. And what's a little bit different from this was like, was I in reactionary mode? No, but I still needed a structural way to reset and realign who I was. So the momentum reset exists to slow things down, remove any shame, and restore the clarity of who you want. That way you could start changing trajectory from reactive to intentional all over again. And, what's really great is I give you a daily prompt. We have weekly calls. And, one of the biggest things is that, like, self help, I've read every book under the sun about self help, especially, because I was losing myself multiple times. And I've read leadership books and everything. The biggest thing is that it seems daunting. So I make it fun. So if you join Momentum Reset, it's completely free. Yes, you could do this work, but let's have some fun and join. And today's poll was are hot dog sandwiches? Yes or no? Because in a way, maybe they are, but really, I don't know. So I'm curious. So school.com/momentum reset. So with that said, I'm going to leave you with this. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're probably just ready to lead yourself again. That concludes this week's episode. I'm Brian Walsh, your guide to habit crafting and biggest champion. Thanks for tuning in to Bad Day Excellence. See you next time.